they only come in giant.
Yeah, always hits last night.
I don't know if it comes, we got it in charcoal with purple.
Ooh, that would be nice.
Yeah, we have it in charcoal with purple,
I'll take that.
but I don't know.
The Alliance is going to adopt Elson Park. We're going to tune it up once a month. Weather permit
I have a roll.
What day are you looking?
on Saturday.
It was a necklace you had back.
I don't know exactly. I'll let you know.
Really couldn't even
I know
move my head.
we're going to do it on Saturday.
I was
usually bring my
crazy.
leaf blower down, but yeah.
Well, today.
Oh my God, it's cold in here again. Do you feel it? It's Arctic air.
Probably not.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, you have no nerve endings on your body.
I did it.
Well, if you're ever
No, I don't.
I tried. She's still on vacation.
All right, good evening, everybody. Today's June 27, 2022. We're going to begin in about 30 seconds. Please ensure your cell phones are off or on silent. Council, ensure your microphones are on. All right, so tonight is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. Before we begin our regular legislative meeting, we're going to hop into our individual committee meetings. And first up, we have a special streets, sidewalk, and lighting committee, since we did not have a committee meeting last week. So, Mrs. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to call to order the Street, Sidewalks, and Lighting Committee. Today is June 27th, 2022. It's 6 p.m. We are in council chambers. Nina Angeloff is not here. She's on leave, vacation. And it is myself and Mr. Griffin. All other council members are noted on my sheet, as well as those present in the gallery. The topics of discussion for tonight, there is a piece of requested legislation, a letter from Michael Teodecki, city engineer, requesting legislation to allow the mayor to enter into contract with the Thrasher Group, Inc. for professional engineering services for the development of the South Barberton Stormwater Master Plan. Portions of the results will be incorporated into the storm sewer system that will be built with the South Van Buren project. The cost is not to exceed $78,775. Emergency wording requested. As requested, this went before the Utilities Committee on 6/13/2022 and was approved. That's it.
To call for it, you have.
Okay, and then I just go, okay. Do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
You have to invoke the
Oh.
rule first.
You can call for this piece of legislation tonight,
coming
and
up?
we'll invoke the rule during the reading tonight.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
I'll make a motion to call for it.
And I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
It passes. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I will second that, and we are adjourned at 6:02 p.m.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Bailey. On our agenda, there's a special health committee meeting. That special meeting has been canceled. That was put on just in case that we had to have that meeting, since last week there was no quorum as well. So we're going to skip the special health committee meeting. And next up is City Properties, Parks and Recreation with Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Properties and Park Recreation meeting today, June 27, 2022. December. It's cold out in here. It's hot. 6:03, council chambers. All members also noted and present. Other council members besides Mrs. Nina Angeloff is present. We have one request legislation. A letter from Mayor Just requesting legislation to enter a contract to purchase 107 Fifth Street Northwest, the Barberton Masonic Temple. This is a joint project with the City of Barberton and the Barberton Municipal Court. Emergency wording and one reading requested. Any questions or remarks?
Thank you, sir. Mayor, do you have details?
So the purchase price is $275. And what was your second question now, the agreement?
What fund is being used?
It's my understanding it's going to be the court special project.
Court Special Projects Fund?
So it's for sure the courts, nothing in the city?
Correct.
Okay, courts.
Thank you.
A couple more other questions for you, Mr. Mayor. Is there an estimate for renovation to outfit the building for the courthouse? Would that be through us or that through the courts?
No, we would work with the courts as we have been on this joint partnership for Justice Center / Community Building.
So then,
I mean, if there's a part of the building that's going to be used for courts would handle that cost. Anything used by the city would pay for that.
and what would the city want to use that building for?
Well, we're looking at Justice Center / Community Building, so there's a lot of opportunity over there with the space. So trying to find out what the best fit is and how best to use it, because there's the buildings, have you been in there?
Yes.
The building's got a big stage and grand kind of area, but then there's some other offices and different rooms. So how do we best utilize that?
And we would take that instead of moving forward with the old pit stop, or we'd still want to move to the old pit stop?
I think at this time, building from the ground up is just too cost prohibitive.
That's one of the questions. Let me see. Okay. So just for make sure again, that's for the courts funds, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions from committee or council members? Any questions from chambers? All right. Seeing none, can I get a motion for this, please?
I'll make a motion for this.
I'll second it.
And get a vote, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Second request, legislation. We have a letter from Stacy Carr, Planning Department, requesting legislation for the mayor to enter a contract to accept a vacant lot at 67 21st Street Northwest, parcel 1.09794 as a donation to include in the Barberton Land Bank Program. Emergency wording, one reading requested. Any questions? Mr. Heidick?
Do we have any planned use for this parcel?
So this is an area that's flood prone, and so it's on the west side of where the former Sandtrock School was, I guess southwest. We own some lots to the north of this, and so there was an underground storm pipe that we straightened out before the school was torn, or maybe after the school was torn down, that helped alleviate a lot of the stormwater. That's still kind of a low area there where we have a street that dead ends into the street. So there's a huge opportunity to make additional storm mitigation features there, whether that's a retention pond or not. This is not a huge lot. I don't believe it's buildable by today's standards. Yeah, it's 33 by 154, so our minimum, I think, is 40. And so this is coming as a result of the estate that's being settled. So we were contacted by an attorney representing the estate.
Thank you.
Any other questions, committee, council members, president?
Thanks, Chair. The property, has it been assessed with taxes, and if the city does get it, do we dissolve, do the taxes, back taxes dissolve on the property?
The estate will make sure all the taxes are paid out.
Thank you.
So it's a win-win situation for the city. All right, can I get a motion for this, please?
I'll make a motion.
I will second that.
And take a vote, please. Motion.
Aye.
Aye. Carries. Thank you. We have pending draft legislation, ordinance number 93-2022, title appropriation Parks City Grant Fund. Another vote for finance. Any remarks on that? No? All right, open this up to any discussion. Committee? Mr. Heidi?
Have you been in contact with the director in that camera company there at all?
No, not yet. Haven't
Okay.
got no information back, anything.
Yep.
All right,
I didn't see him here. I didn't know if you had spoken with him or anything.
I'll shoot him an email and give him a call tomorrow. Any updates, I'll give you guys a forward email.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Any other miscellaneous discussion, committee? Other council members? All right, you get a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Mr. Heidick, Ms. Fry. And we adjourn today, sir, at 6:10. With that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Jaber. Next up, Public Welfare and Safety, Mrs. Frack.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight is Monday, June the 27th. It is 6:09 PM, and I am bringing the Public Safety and Welfare Committee to order. We are in council chambers, and all council members are present with the exception of Mrs. Angela. My whole committee is here, which is comprised of me as the chair, Mr. Shorter Griffin, and Mrs. Joyce Coburn. And other guests as noted on my agenda sheet. There were no new requests for legislation. However, we do have some pending legislation, actually only one piece, and it is ordinance number 94-2022 titled Enter into Contract U.S. Royce Protection Service. This is for the contract for the unarmed guards at the metal detector at the entrance to the building. Does anybody have any questions about the contract? We will be voting on that tonight. Does anyone have any miscellaneous discussion for tonight's meeting?
I do not.
Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Coburn. And we are adjourned at 6:10 PM.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Rules, Marketing, and Development, Mr. Griffin.
I would like to call this meeting to order. Today is June 27th, time is 6:11 PM. We are meeting in council chambers, all members are present, and all others noted. Tonight, we have no requests for legislation. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion? Could I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. We're adjourned at 6:12.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. City Utilities, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to call the city utilities to order. It's June 27th, 6:12 PM. We're in council chambers. All members of the council, which is myself as chair, Carol Fry and Erica Bailey, are present, and others as noted. We have no request for legislation. We have a pending ordinance number 92-2022, enter into contract with Thrasher Corporation along with streets. We'll be voting on that tonight. Do we have any comments on that one? Do we have any miscellaneous discussion for utilities? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Fry?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second that.
Erica Bailey seconds. We are adjourned at 6:12.
Thank you, Mrs. Coburn. Last but not least, Finance and Personnel, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance personnel is Monday, June 27th, 2022. It is 6:13 in council chambers. The committee consists of Councilors Coburn, Thompson, President Greer, and myself as chair. All others noted. For requested legislation, one of the rare weeks, I have none. Pending, I'll just run through these and I'll open it up for those. We have Ordinance 85, 2022, amending Ordinance 47, 2021, compensation for elected officials. The first reading will be tonight. Ordinance 90, 2022, appropriation planning for the city grant fund. Ordinance number 91, 2022, enter into contract with T&M Associates with planning, both of those. Ordinance 93, 2022, appropriation Parks City Grant Fund, that's with Parks. Resolution 95, 2022, titled Tax Levy for the Police, which cannot be used for wages. Ordinance number 96, 2022, enter into contract, insurance coverage, property, vehicle, and liability. Is there any comments from the committee on any of the pending? The body? The gallery? Then I can open it up for a miscellaneous discussion from the committee. Body?
Oh,
Counselor?
we have the letter for the DORA. Did we have any discussion on that?
That is requested to Counselor Thompson for the planning committee.
Okay. That's not this week then.
Nope.
Thank you.
Anything from the gallery? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, and we are adjourned at 6:14.
All right. That concludes the individual committee meetings this evening. We're going to take a 5-minute break, come back at 6:20 PM to start the regular legislative meeting.
Tabor.
That's during legislative.
Okay.
Good legislation.
Oh,
I haven't seen him at all. You?
No, I called him, he won't call me back or nothing.
Yes.
thank you.
I was like, I don't hate you.
I heard Kim was in the hospital.
Yeah, he told me, yeah.
I told you that, I called, left a message, they don't call me back.
Way better.
I drove by the house a couple times, in the bar. If the front door was open, I'd get out, but it wasn't, you know. I don't know if you can hear good. I was knocking on the door one time, knocking on the window. I could hear her talking in there. Thelma.
There's a lot of wiring and all that stuff. These are speakers, that's extra lighting.
This is kind of the stuff.
It's an old.
Hey, how you doing? Council meeting right now. And not in the door, but nobody heard. Later's on the side. That's cool. You don't know, you got new plans coming in the corner. Cancel the sidewalk and the driveway. Driveway for sidewalk. So keep me posted, but I talked to the guys from today. She should be giving me a call. Yeah. All right, awesome.
But then
Sounds good then.
Put it up in the gallery, I was so tempted to say, this, let me be useful.
That was the quickest committee meetings.
should we sit here and dash things around there?
Okay,
Right.
you know, when I wrote the story, I didn't explicitly say it, but what I did say was that it was used for big ticket items, like, you know, like vehicles and construction, you know, and so I thought that it was clear in the context, big ticket was big.
What, the planning?
No, I mean our meetings.
Yeah, I just said it was really quick. For once. Oh my God, it's so cold in here.
So you can have one that's council.
Yeah, or, yeah.
You know how that goes. How's the kid?
No, he has a full body rash today.
I think short
Due to the virus. Not contagious, but.
I can play without paper.
It was 07 special.
Seven.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which means it might.
Was that in February?
Yeah, it was like, it was super
This is
early.
all over his.
It wasn't your May, September, or general.
It's just due to the virus. It's not itchy or anything.
And there was only 2 levies on that one, I believe. It was Barberton and somebody else.
Sorry about you again.
But we'll have. You are so, yeah. I like it. And it's color, so you get your highlights. All right, thank you.
And then continue to read the one.
Oh, yeah.
His resolution.
I got her flowers.
That was a good call. When you said that, I was like,
I didn't bring anybody from Barberton either.
Always going through all that stuff.
We spent all the dryers one time, they left the dryer and they left all the hot litter. We just banged it up and put it in the dryer and
Yes.
it shut instead of.
you got 1 extra day. So, no later than tomorrow. It should be in, if that's the case. What you'll do, I suppose, that's.
Right, and if that's the case, it's because it's an accompanying thing.
Right.
She might have been.
Yeah, you said that was in the, but I didn't see her.
I purchased something else, so we should go on vacation.
Missy went today and she's very.
Thanks, sir. I think we'll put this in.
That's what he was.
All right, well, we'll work on that today and tomorrow.
First night of Bible camp. Wanted to make sure everything went okay, but she's not responding. I think it feels good. No.
That organization, Robin Woods War Tribe. It's not a very, he wanted it a long time ago. They take,
That's it all.
and they start getting the skills and
Okay,
training
wait a
up.
minute, wait a minute. I talked to a guy, he was saying, tall guy, he was telling me about
Except for the ones with
that.
Heineck, but the Truson ones are
Spelled incorrectly.
first only.
Somewhat passed out.
Oh, okay.
Little flyers or
Okay.
whatever.
There's an H
Okay.
on this one.
Yeah, that's what they do.
So I
This
can't
guy was
read.
telling me about it.
That says trasher.
Yeah,
That
okay.
says thrasher.
Construction.
Not my fault.
Age,
No.
all that is training men that
Right,
women
right,
side,
right.
training them to them skills to get working again.
The invocation. Just making sure.
Oh, buddy, I'm on it, man.
But
Not out at it.
No, it did.
people that
There was
have been released,
probably been 1 week where I didn't.
they
I
can't.
need to pull my seat away. So
All right, good evening, everybody. Just a reminder, please ensure your cell phones are off or on silent. Council members, please ensure your microphones are on.
Turned yours off, Carol.
Today is June 27th, 2022. This is regular legislative meeting of the Barberton City Council. I call this meeting to order at 6:22 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by Mr.
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We meet to serve. We meet to serve our community, to use our resources wisely and well, to represent all members of our community fairly, to make decisions that promote the common good. We recognize our responsibilities to the past and the future, and the rights and the needs of both individuals and community. As trusted servants, we seek blessings on our deliberations and our efforts here today. May we act wisely and well. Please protect our men and women in our armed forces wherever they may be. Watch over our first responders and all of our safety forces. Give them wisdom to do their job professionally. We ask this in your blessed name. Amen.
Clerk, please call the roll.
President Bricker.
Present.
Mr. Heidick.
Here.
Mrs. Thompson.
Here.
Mrs. Bailey.
Here.
Mrs. Angeloff is excused. Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn.
Here.
Mrs. Frye.
Here.
Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, June 13th, 2022, as presented. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, June 13th, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second that motion to approve the minutes from Monday, June 13th as presented.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, June 13th, 2022, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Approval of the minutes of the public hearing held on Tuesday, June 27th, as presented. Wait, that's today. You can't
It
have it.
says June 21st.
21st.
21st, as presented.
Or for planning.
Approval of the minutes of the public hearing. So that would be Mrs. Thompson. You want to approve those minutes?
Okay, yep. I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the public hearing held on Tuesday, June 21st, 2022, as presented.
And Mr. Heidick, I'll have you second if you would like.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion of approval.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Tuesday, June 21st, 2022, as presented.
Sorry, would you read the second sentence?
The public hearing.
It's a public
Oh,
hearing.
I'm sorry. I'm reading right off this. All right, we'll try this again. It was moved by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to approve the minutes of the public hearing out on Tuesday, June 21st, 2022, as presented. Are there any remarks? Thank you, Mrs. Coburn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Acceptance of the finance report for the month of May 2022 as presented. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the acceptance of the Finance Department report for the month of May 2022 as presented.
Thank you. And Ms. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll move to second the finance report.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to accept the finance report for the month of May 2022 as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The finance report is adopted. Petitions and claims.
We have none.
Thank you. Matters requested.
They've all been dispersed.
Citizens addressing council.
There are none, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mrs. Coburn. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 85, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, amending ordinance number 47, 2021, compensation for elected officials. An ordinance amending ordinance number 47-2021 to establish the compensation for certain elected officials and compensation procedures for the next 4 years. This is the first of 3 readings. Ordinance number 86, 2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Community Reinvestment Area, CRA, Truson Farm. An ordinance implementing sections 3735.65 through 3735.70 of the Ohio Revised Code, establishing and describing the boundaries of a community reinvestment area in the city of Barberton, Ohio, and designating a housing officer to administer the program and declaring an emergency. This is the first of 3 readings. Resolution number 87, 2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Planned Unit Development, 2070 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road. A resolution by the Council of the City of Barberton approving a planned unit development, PUD, for 2070 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road, parcels 74.00278 and 74.00217. This is the first of three readings. Ordinance number 88-2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Zoning Map Amendment, 2070 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road. An ordinance authorizing the rezoning of 2070 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road, parcels 74.00278 and 74.00217, from I-1 Light Industrial to RM18 Residential Multifamily. This is the first of three readings. Ordinance number 89-2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Implementing Tax Increment Financing, Truson Farm. An ordinance declaring improvements to certain real estate within the city of Barberton, Ohio, to be a public purpose, exempting such improvements from real estate property taxation, requiring the owners of the property to make service payments in lieu of real property taxes, establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of service payments, making related authorizations pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code sections 5709.40, 5709.42, 5709.43, and 5709.83, and declaring an emergency. This is the first of three readings. Ordinance number 90-2022, presented by Mr. Heidick and Mrs. Thompson. Title, Appropriation, Planning, City Grant Fund. An ordinance appropriating $450,000 from the unappropriated item of the City Grant Fund to the Planning Department operating budget of the City Grant Fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heddick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela is not here. Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of Ordinance 90-2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to adopt ordinance number 90-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 91-2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Heidick. Title, Enter into Contract T&M Associates. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with T&M Associates in the amount of $450,000 for environmental testing, abatement, and cleanup, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela is absent.
Thank you. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 91-2022.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 91-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 92-2022, presented by Mrs. Angela and Mrs. Coburn. Title, enter into contract, the Thrasher Group. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with the Thrasher Group for professional engineering services in the amount not to exceed $78,775 for the development of the South Barberton Stormwater Master Plan and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Before we motion for suspension here, this is a piece of legislation that was called out of utilities. And since streets didn't have a quorum last week, we held the special today for streets. In order for this to be voted on tonight, we will have to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 401, which is the not called for at Committee of the Whole. I'm comfortable with that, given that it has been in Utilities Committee and it was transferred over to Streets. So, is there a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 401? Ms. Bailey?
I would like to make a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 401 as it was not read in the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Bailey's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Mrs. Bailey motion to suspend Council, or invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 401, and it was seconded by Mr. Griffin. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, now we can move on. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Bailey's motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Bailey and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela is absent.
Thank you. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of Ordinance Number 92-2022. That's it.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm excited to second that motion for adoption.
All right. Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Bailey and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt Resolution 92-2022.
Ordinance.
Mr. President. Ordinance.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, has to be said like that, so. All right. A motion was made by Mrs. Bailey and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt Ordinance 92-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela is absent.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 93-2022, presented by Mr. Jaber and Mr. Heidick. Title, Appropriation Parks, City Grant Fund. An ordinance appropriating $388.33 from the unappropriated item of the City Grant Fund to the Parks Department's capital budget of the City Grant Fund as a result of unused monies received from a grant from the state of Ohio, Coronavirus Relief Fund, Adult Day Service, and Senior Center Provider Relief.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Councilor Jaber's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Jaber and seconded by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela Fasano.
Thank you. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt. Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for adoption of ordinance number 93-2022.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Jaber and seconded by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 93-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela Fasano.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 94-2022, presented by Mrs. Fry. Title, enter into contract, U.S. Royce Protection Service. An ordinance authorizing the Barberton Municipal Court to enter into contract with U.S. Royce Protection Services, formerly known as Tenable Protective, for a period of 1 year to provide unarmed, uniformed security officers and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mr. Griffin to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela Fasano.
Thank you. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 94-2020.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mr. Griffin to adopt ordinance number 94-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela Fasano.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Resolution number 95-2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Tax Levy, Police. A resolution declaring it necessary to levy an additional 0.75 mil tax levy for the purpose of providing and maintaining motor vehicles, communications, other equipment, buildings, and sites for such buildings used directly in the operation of the police department pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code, Sections 5705.19J and 5705.191, and requesting the county fiscal officer to certify the total current tax value of the city and the dollar amount of revenue that would be generated by that additional levy and declaring an emergency. This is the first of 3 readings. Ordinance number 96, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, enter into contract, insurance coverage, property, vehicle, liability. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a professional services contract with Weichert Insurance Company, constituting a 1-year extension of the current contract for the city's property, vehicle, liability insurance coverage, due to expire on June 29th, 2022, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela is absent.
Thank you. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of Ordinance 96, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 96-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela is absent. This ends the first reading.
Thank you. Second readings of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Third readings of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Miscellaneous and unfinished business. Is there anything else from the body? Nothing from the body? Is there anything else from department heads today? All right. I don't have anything other than 4th of July is coming up, so next meeting's on Tuesday. This may seem like the end of the meeting, but we're actually going into an executive session after this. So we're not adjourning. We're going to go into executive session after communication from the mayor. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I make a motion to excuse Counselor Angeloff?
That would fall under here. Yes, you may.
Well, I will make that motion.
All right.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Fry to excuse Mrs. Angeloff for the regular legislative meeting today. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mrs. Angeloff is excused for this meeting. Thank you for that, Mr. Heidick. Communication from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, council, for passing ordinance 91, 2022, hiring T&M Associates to carry out the grant that we received from Ohio Department of Development at the planned Magic Marketplace building down the street here. So still working on a development agreement with the developer, but this is moving forward, and I'll get that agreement here pretty soon and continue moving forward. So. You may have noticed kind of a little upgrade, but the 2 drinking fountains in the building not only helps fill water bottles a lot faster because it's got that feature to it, but kind of cool, it calculates the number of plastic water bottles that are being saved by continuing using the same cups. So just a few short weeks, 350 bottles, water bottles, or plastic bottles that have been saved. Just a small step in trying to reduce the number of plastic bottles that are being used and discarded. If you've read any articles recently, it's a huge, huge concern for water systems and just for dump sites and for just the planet overall. So didn't have that in mind when we were purchasing those, but just something that kind of an added feature that is nice to show when you fill up your bottles. This past weekend I had held open office hours for the residents. A lot of good questions and comments from the residents. Still a few items to look into and get back to them, but the feedback was very, very positive about the community, about the neighborhoods. There's a lot of changes out there. So the residents that came in, some have been Barbertonians for quite a while, and some are a little newer to the little background music. But you know, a lot of changes. We've seen this in our neighborhoods and, you know, where we grew up and people that we've associated with have moved away or new neighbors have come in. So a lot of changes, but all very positive. Last week we had 2 different developers in that we met with that were kind of new to Barberton, but they kind of did all their due diligence and research on several sites. So continuing to meet with them to see if there's any traction moving forward. We have another developer that we're meeting with this week, separate from the 2 from last week. So hopefully there's some traction there as well. So I'll keep you informed. We did meet with 4 potential new businesses that want to move to Barberton last week. So all manufacturing, size of the business is a little different among each other, but some of those I know will come to fruition here in the coming months, so really looking forward to that. Once I'm able to release more information, I will. And then just a number of new businesses in town and some existing businesses that are continuing to grow. So I say this, and please be mindful that these new businesses are great, but we're still not making up the loss that we had when Babcock's and Wilcox moved to Akron. So that income tax revenue, we still haven't made that up. Still far, far away from what was pulled out of Barberton. But we are making headway, so we are moving in the right direction, but still got a lot of work to go to do. So that's all I have for my report. Are there any questions? Yes.
The two new developers that you mentioned, those are housing developers or building developers, like commercial building?
They've both done a little bit of both.
Okay.
They've done some mixed use as well. Any other questions? Yes.
Are you rescheduling the Change for Change for Astoria and Shoe Fund?
Yeah, so we had to cancel that. There was no air conditioning at Hodges Cafe, so we had to cancel that. So we're talking with them about rescheduling it, whether that's 2 in the same month to get it back on track, or just another month later in the year. So
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Thanks.
All right. Anything else? You look like you want to say something.
Not in front of everybody, I'll say behind the scenes. Pretty good though.
All right. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. A request was made by Safety Human Resource Director Jamie Eisman to enter into executive session to consider collective bargaining matters and matters to remain confidential. Having stated this request, I will entertain a motion to enter into executive session of council. Do I have a motion to enter into executive session? Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to enter into executive session.
Thank you. Is there a second? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion for executive session.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to enter into executive session to consider the collective bargaining matters. Before we take a vote, I would like to tell the gallery that there is no more matters on the agenda for the city council. However, city council will come back and adjourn after the executive session. So you're welcome to hang out in the hallway if you'd like, but there is nothing else on the agenda. Clerk, please call the roll on the executive session.
President Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey,
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff is not here, Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.